Welcome. Today we're covering Chapter 3, which is carbohydrates. We've already covered the introduction, which kind of gives us an overview and lays the foundation for the entire semester. And today we're covering carbohydrates. A misconception about carbohydrates is that they're fattening. Have you ever heard that? Carbs are actually the ideal fuel because they're an awesome energy source for the body. When I say the word carbohydrate, I'm referring to fruits and vegetables and starches. Some carbohydrate intake is necessary for body functions, but too many calories from any energy source, whether it's protein, carb, or fat, will convert to body fat and cause weight gain. 1 gram of carbohydrate, simple or complex, contains 4 calories a gram, the same as 1 gram of protein, and fewer calories than a gram of alcohol, which are 7 calories a gram, and fat, which is 9 calories a gram, as we learned in Chapter 1. Carbohydrates become calorically heavy when they're eaten in combination with fat, for example. Like, for instance, if I eat a piece of bread and I have butter on it, or let's say I eat a croissant, which is made with a lot of fat, that carbohydrate becomes very calorically heavy because I'm including fat calories along with the carbohydrate. So therefore, it's not necessarily just 4 calories a gram. By adding the fat, we're also adding fat calories, which is 9 calories a gram. Another example would be potato strips fried in oil to make French fries, or pasta prepared with a cream sauce. So all those are, heavily laden with fat. So cutting carbs often results in cutting fat calories too. So it really depends on how you partner a carbohydrate. But carbohydrates themselves are very nutritionally advantageous. They are an awesome energy source. And as we'll learn, they are the best energy source for the brain and the central nervous system. Remember to review the handouts for whole grains and from the Produce for Better Health that are included in your module. So today's learning objectives are, we're going to talk a lot about carbohydrates and talk about basic sugars and sweeteners and the importance of meeting dietary recommendations for those. We're going to compare and contrast starch and fibers, including food sources, recommendations, and health benefits. And then we're going to talk about a whole grain, what that is and how that compares to a refined grain and why whole grains are much healthier for your body. We're going to talk about the functions of carbohydrates and how that affects different problems that we have in our country, such as diabetes, and how to make healthier carbohydrate choices. So we're going to cover a lot of ground today with carbohydrates. So let's talk about carbohydrates in general. When you talk about carbohydrate, it's a large class of nutrients and it includes sugars, starches, and fibers. And they provide most of the energy for your body. When we talked about the macronutrient distribution in the earlier chapters, we talked about carbohydrate being 45 to 65% of your daily calories. When we looked at the My Plate, we obviously saw that carbohydrates take up the majority of the food on your plate from the standpoint of fruits and vegetables and grains. Meat, poultry, seafood contain no carbohydrates. So fruits and vegetables and grains and foods that have fiber have carbohydrate, but meat and poultry and seafood do not have carbohydrates. Sugars occur naturally in some food, such as fruit, which explains why they're sweet. Sugar is also added to food and beverages, such as sweet treats and soft drinks. So we have naturally occurring sugar, and we have added sugar. Starches, on the other hand, are those foods that are familiar to most people, such as potatoes, corn, bread, pasta, etc. Many starches, as well as fruit, also contain the carbohydrate called fiber. We're going to cover that in great detail. Foods are a combination of various macronutrients. We find carbs in all of the food except for meat, poultry, and seafood. They contain protein and some fat, but no carbohydrates. So like we mentioned in earlier chapters, most food is a combination of all the different macronutrients, protein, carb, and fat. Some food, such as oil, salad dressing, are pure fat. Some, such as starches and sugars, have a little bit of protein, primarily carbohydrate. Grains like oats and rice are rich in carbohydrates. It's no surprise that most carb foods are also plant foods. Plants make their own carbohydrate, a sugar called glucose, in a process known as photosynthesis. The plant then uses that energy in glucose to grow and be healthy, just like humans. So most carbohydrate foods are plants. Plants make their own carb, which is glucose. There are two types of carbohydrates that we need to be aware of. One is called a simple carbohydrate. Those are primarily sugars. They're the building blocks of most sweeteners that we use. Complex, on the other hand, are more complex as a chemical structure. Complex carbohydrates are your starches and your fibers. Complex carbohydrates contain chains of glucose, which is a simple sugar. So when we talk about simple versus complex, they're different foods, but the terms actually refer to the chemical makeup of that particular carbohydrate. So let's break this down a little bit further. Sugars are simple carbohydrates, and they are naturally occurring sugars in fruits, vegetables, milk, and honey, as well as added and processed sugars in soft drinks, candy, baked goods, jams, jellies, etc. All simple carbohydrates contain small sugar units. Those are the building blocks of most sweeteners that we use. Monosaccharides, which means mono, one sugar, and disaccharide, meaning two sugars, that are easily broken down and converted to glucose. So when you eat something that is a simple carbohydrate, it's very easily broken down, absorbed into the bloodstream. Not much metabolism, not much digestion has to go on. Single sugars are glucose, fructose, and galactose. Double sugars are sucrose, maltose, and lactose. Sucrose is found in white sugar, and lactose is found in milk. When we talk about single sugars, we have several. Glucose is the most abundant sugar in nature. Just as plants make their own glucose, which is burned for energy, glucose is your primary energy source as well. Most of the carbs that you eat produce glucose for the body to use to make energy or to store. The amount of glucose in your blood is called blood glucose, which is vital to the proper functioning of the body. This may be a little confusing to some of us because we kind of think in our mind that sugar isn't really healthy, but yet we're saying it's the most abundant type of sugar, it's the most important energy source. So how does that all work? Well, basically, when you eat food, it has to be broken down into a smaller components so that your body can absorb it and use it for energy. So that's why we say it's the most important energy source. When you eat sugar, it also is affecting the amount of glucose or sugar in your blood. So it's very important to have a certain amount, but when it goes awry, if you have too much or if you have some sort of metabolic issue like diabetes or insulin resistance, then it becomes a problem. When we talk about glucose, it's found in fruits and honey and many plant foods. Another single sugar is fructose. Fructose is the sweetest natural sugar. When I look at things like fruit and honey, it's actually a natural sugar. So does that mean fruit is not good? Fruit is bad? Fruit is wonderful because it's a natural sweetener. And not only does it have that natural sugar that a lot of people enjoy, it also has fiber and a lot of vitamins and minerals and antioxidants. So that's what sets fruits apart from something like, just plain sugar that we put in our iced tea or coffee. Fructose is also found in honey. Honey is different than fruit. It doesn't have all the vitamins and minerals and fiber that fruit does, but it is a natural sugar, natural sweetener. And then, of course, fructose is also found in high fructose corn syrup, which is manufactured from corn syrup. And it's used to sweeten soft drinks, candy, and all other products, such as barbecue sauce, ketchup, a lot of different condiments that we use. So let's talk about high fructose corn syrup for a minute. High fructose corn syrup is a group of corn syrups that have undergone enzymatic processing to convert some of their glucose into fructose. The fructose is then mixed with pure corn syrup, which is 100% glucose. Because of traditional agriculture subsidies for corn and taxes on imported sugar, high fructose corn syrup is less expensive than sugar, and as a liquid, it's easier to blend and also transport. So that's why we use a lot of that in food manufacturing in our country. The use of high fructose corn syrup has expanded greatly since the FDA granted it generally recognized as safe, and that status became available in 1983. It's called the GRAS list, and that stands for generally recognized as safe. Soft drinks are a major source of high fructose corn syrup in the American diet. Studies suggest that high rates of obesity parallel the rising consumption of high fructose corn syrup, and that larger quantities of fructose stimulate the triglyceride formation and insulin resistance that contributes to diabetes. The Corn Refiners Association and other industry organizations have launched aggressive campaigns to position high fructose corn syrup as natural and argue that it is safe and equal to sugar in health effects. Here's the bottom line. Most people eat too much sugar. Most people eat too much added sugar, whatever the form. So the bottom line is, don't pick on one form of sugar or another, like high fructose corn syrup. The idea is to pick on sugar, to really focus on following the dietary guidelines for Americans percentage, and that's keeping, pure sugar lower in your diet and focusing more on whole food that provides a lot more nutrients and fiber. All right, getting back to the slide, galactose is our last single sugar, and it's almost always linked to glucose to make sugar that's found in milk, called lactose. The sugar in milk is not very sweet, but think about it. The last time you poured yourself a glass of milk and some of it got on the counter and you didn't wipe it up, when you came back several hours later, the countertop is very sticky. So there is sugar found in milk, but it's not very sweet. Okay, so those are our single sugars, our glucose, fructose, and galactose. On the other hand, we have double sugars. Sucrose, or whatever we call white sugar or granulated sugar, is the chemical name of the double sugar containing glucose and fructose, and that's why it's a double sugar. Many sweeteners, such as brown sugar and maple syrup, contain a lot of sucrose. White sugar has virtually no nutrients and is 16 calories a teaspoon. So think about it. You have to put all these different foods that we have access to in their proper perspective. When I think of sugar, I don't think of a bad thing. I think of it as something that is pleasurable, something that really adds a little variety to our diet, to our meals. The thing to remember is a teaspoon is only 16 calories. That never broke the calorie budget. That never made anybody obese. It's the quantity that we're eating, what we're using it in, and all these different factors, how much we're eating, that really makes the biggest difference. So again, all foods fit into a healthy diet. It's very important to understand the quantity that you're eating, how you're preparing it, and how often you're eating it. So when we talk about sugar, it's not necessarily the bad guy unless you're consuming so much of it that you are eating sugar instead of all the other food groups that are actually providing you with vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and fiber. This slide is just a visual of single sugars and double sugars. So on this page, white sugar is 99% sucrose, maltose is found in bread, and lactose is found in milk. Sucrose is also found in cane sugar, which is a very tall grass that grows in tropical countries. It's also found in sugar beets, which is a root crop. A lot of processing and refining is required to produce white sugar from both the sugar cane, and the sugar beets. Table sugar is made from sucrose that's found in sugar cane and sugar beets. The question is, do we need it? Do we need sugar in our diet? From a nutritional point of view, we don't need sugar, but sweeteners play an important role, especially in baking. For those of you who are pastry students, sugar, you know this, sugar helps balance the acidity of ingredients, such as tomatoes and vinegar. So if you're making a big pot of spaghetti sauce, you need a little bit of sugar to break the acidity in the tomatoes or the sauce. Sugar browns the crust in baking. Any of you who've experimented with some of the non-nutritive sweeteners, that's one of the biggest problems. The crust doesn't brown when there's no sugar. Sugar also helps to retain moisture in baked goods so that they stay fresh. Many times they use sugar when they're packaging dried fruit. Dried fruit is already more concentrated in sugar because it's dehydrated, and many times they add sugar to retain the moisture and also to extend the shelf life. Sugar affects texture and tenderizing in baked goods, and it also contributes to the rise of cakes, cookies, and quick breads because it helps to incorporate air into the batter during the creaming process. So you can see it serves a lot of function. The problem is, again, many times we consume a lot more sugar than we really need in our diet. There is a guide on page 70 of your textbooks of some of the caloric sweeteners we use in cooking and baking. It lists solid sweeteners and also liquid. Solid sweeteners are generally lower in calories, approximately 16 calories per teaspoon. Unlike liquid sweeteners that can range anywhere from 19 calories per teaspoon for molasses to 25 calories for brown rice sugar per teaspoon. Honey is about 21 calories a teaspoon. Now, most people don't use teaspoons when it comes to the liquid form of sugar. Most of the time, the typical serving size would be a tablespoon. So that would be 63 calories for honey versus 48 calories for a tablespoon of regular sugar. And the reason that I point this out is that many times people assume that because honey is from nature, because honey is a natural sugar, that it's better. And there's really no way that it's better in terms of the nutritional benefits. So there's really no nutritional advantage. Now you can use it in different ways. It's adding a little bit more liquid when you're doing your cooking. But the reality is it's a little bit higher in calories per teaspoon. Now the one thing that I want you to always keep in mind is that the human body cannot tell the difference between natural and refined sugar. By the time they're absorbed, they're identical. And this point is to be remembered because there's a lot of voices out there in the popular press that want to say, don't eat high fructose corn syrup, only eat cane sugar, et cetera, whatever messages you hear. The reality is our bodies can't tell the difference. So a sugar is a sugar. It's all caloric. It's all low in nutrients. And it does typically foods that have a lot of sugar don't have fiber. The USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, estimates that Americans consumed more than 80 pounds of caloric sweeteners last year. And that's primarily cane and beet sugars and high fructose corn syrup sweeteners that are found in soft drinks. And that is per person. So 80 pounds of calorie sweetened products per person. This number represents typically about 375 calories extra per day. The Dietary Guidelines for Americans reports that Americans get about 16% of their calories from added sugar, primarily from sweetened soda, energy drinks, sport drinks, fruit drinks, desserts, and candy. Now, how does that compare to what's recommended? Well, because we don't really need sugar, if you never had it, it would never matter. Like, it's not nutritional, so it's not a part of your diet. But if you want to enjoy some, dietary guidelines suggest that most people should have no more than 10% of their calories from sugar every day. So if you're a female and you're eating between 1,500 and 1,800 calories a day, that means that you should limit your intake of sugary foods to 150 to 180 calories. For men, that would be 1,800 to 2,200 calories. So the average male should have no more than 180 to 200 calories worth of sweet things. And that really isn't very generous when you think that an average half cup of ice cream is 350 calories, that an average candy bar is 250 to 300, and the average soft drink is 150 calories. So the reality is we eat a lot of sugar, and we have to realize where it fits in to a healthy meal planning. Now let's break away for a minute and talk about low-calorie or no-calorie sweeteners, sometimes known as non-nutritive sweeteners because they don't contain any nutrients. The introduction of diet soda in the 1950s sparked the widespread use of sweeteners that provide no or almost no calories. There are three categories of low and no-calorie sweeteners. We have sucralose, we have aspartame or aspartame, and acesulfame potassium. Artificial man-made sweeteners. Sucralose comes under the brand name of Splenda. Aspartame is Equal. Acesulfame potassium is Sunette. Saccharin, the brand name is Sweet and Low. And these are all found in things like diet soft drinks, in little packets, and a lot of other products. They're very high intensity sweeteners. They have no calories generally except for aspartame, but so little aspartame is used in a product that the calories are so close to zero. So for more information, I would highly recommend referring to the Calorie Control Council. And you can find their website at www.caloriecontrol.org. Another really good resource is the International Food Information Council. They have a fact sheet on low-calorie sweeteners. Their website is www.ific.org. Another form of no-calorie sweetener is a sugar replacer. These are also called polyols or sugar alcohols. They're a group of carbohydrates that are sweet and occur naturally in plants. Polyols provide half the calories as sugar and do not promote tooth decay. In excess, polyols can cause abdominal cramping and diarrhea, and too much erythritol can cause nausea. So you always know when it's a sugar alcohol because of the OLS on the end. The next group of no-calorie sweeteners are extracts from plants, such as the stevia plant, the monk fruit. The monk fruit actually is grown in Central Asia, and the stevia shrub is grown in South America. Neither contribute any calories. The monk fruit extracts are 150 to 200 times sweeter than table sugar, and stevia is actually 200 to 400 times sweeter. No matter what category of low or no calorie sweeteners we're referring to, the flavor is never 100% perfect. They can help with weight loss if you eat fewer calories than is necessary and also provide and do your daily exercise. No matter if it's real sugar or a sugar sweetener, a no-calorie sweetener, it's really important to exercise moderation mentality. Even though it's a low or no-calorie sweetener, it doesn't give you the authority to eat as much as you want because we don't necessarily know long-term consequences. A lot of them have been studied extensively, and it really is individual. Some people have had some side effects from having, different no-calorie sweeteners, but for the most part, the science tells us that they are okay to use in moderation. There's a table on page 72 and 73. It's a very good visual of how many teaspoons of sugar are in various common foods. And I love these kind of charts because it really kind of brings it a little bit more home. Like, for instance, a 12-ounce Monster drink has 10 teaspoons of sugar, just like the amount of sugar in your 12-ounce soft drink. You find added sugars in things like beverages, sodas, soft drinks, sweet teas, lemonade, energy drinks, vitamin waters. And then, of course, desserts and snacks and breakfast cereals. And like I mentioned before, ketchup, barbecue sauce, yogurt, specialty coffees. Anything in excess is not beneficial for the body. So moderation mentality is really the best approach when we're talking about sugar. So how do we identify added sugars? So for instance, if you're looking at a nutrition fact label and you're looking at the ingredient list for cereal, you'll notice that there's very different ways to identify sugar. There's sugar. Under the cereal, there's sugar, there's brown sugar syrup, dextrose. Under the soda, there's high fructose corn syrup. So you'll see a lot of different words for the same thing that's called sugar. I always say that sugar masquerades under a lot of different names. And of course, these are an example of foods that are high in added sugar. No surprise. When we talk about food manufacturing and the types of sugars that are used in various products, the types of added sugars will be in the form of confectioner's sugar, molasses, brown sugar, white sugar, any number of these you'll see on packages. The more added sugars that you consume, the greater your risk of, 1, gaining weight and becoming overweight and obese. And that's for children and adults because, as you well know, it's just so easy to overconsume foods that have sugar. It's also very easy to consume foods that have sugar that are mixed with fat, such as cookies, such as cake with frosting. So it's very easy to overconsume your calorie budget if you're eating a lot of sugary foods. You also run the risk having type 2 diabetes, also high blood pressure and heart disease, and then, of course, tooth decay. And not only do sugars contribute to tooth decay, but also a high starch content diet. What do health authorities say about added sugar? The American Heart Association recommends a drastic reduction in the consumption of added sugars. The American Diabetes Association suggests that a prudent upper limit of intake is half of the discretionary calorie allowance, which for most Americans is no more than 100 calories a day. For men, no more than 150 calories a day. Recent evidence suggests that eating excessive amounts boosts triglyceride levels, which then, of course, increases your risk of heart disease. The World Health Organization, on the other hand, is the one that recommends less than 10% of your calories coming from added sugar. So you can see that they're all in agreement about the importance of, limiting and not eating excessive amounts of sugar. If you look at a can of soft drink, I want you to visualize a can of a soft drink. It's 12 ounces. If you read from the nutritional fact label, the drink has 40 grams of sugar. To find out how many teaspoons that is, you divide 40, which is 40 grams of sugar in that drink, by 4, which is 4 calories per gram. And you'll find the answer in household measurements is 10 teaspoons. So visualize that 10 teaspoons of sugar, or better yet, 10 packets of sugar that you get at the restaurant. Have you ever put that many packets of sugar in your iced tea? So again, everything is based on moderation. And when you're having something like a soft drink, it goes down so easy, you don't necessarily realize that you're getting that much sugar. But if you were to put that many teaspoons of sugar in your iced tea or coffee, you probably couldn't drink it. So the maximum added sugar for a person per day is less than 10% of our total calories, or no more than 6 teaspoons per day for women and 9 teaspoons a day for men. Okay, enough about sugar. Let's talk about starches and fibers. Starch is what we call a complex carbohydrate because it's made up of a long chain of glucose molecules linked together. They're found in grains, legumes, and certain vegetables. Plants store glucose in the form of starch. And starch is a chain of hundreds and thousands of glucose molecules that are linked together. Starch is only found in plant foods. So when you think of meat or poultry or seafood, there's no starch. There's no carbohydrate.